Hashtag the United Federation of Planets regretted asking what was in the humanity starter kit. The United Federation of Planets prided itself on being an exemplar of interstellar governance, a beacon of stability and order in an otherwise chaotic cosmos. Several cycles had passed since humanity had been admitted into their ranks, and the initial shock waves of that decision had mostly settled. The gargantuan bureaucratic machine that was the Federation had, in its own methodical and frequently sluggish way, adapted to the presence of these curious bipeds from the third planet of an unremarkable yellow star. The Federation Council, in their infinite wisdom, believed they had successfully domesticated the initial chaos that humans had brought with them, or at the very least, they had developed elaborate systems to navigate around it. Humanity had been slotted into the grand organizational chart of the Federation with minimal disruption to the overall functioning of the interstellar body, or so they thought. Chancellor Zorp, a venerable Gravelaxian with skin that had faded from its youthful azure to a distinguished pale cerulean, presided over the council with the steady hand of experience. Over his long tenure, he had witnessed the Federation weather numerous crises, from the quantum plague to the brief but alarming incursion of the Void Collective. The integration of humanity, while challenging, had seemed manageable in comparison. Yet even now, small but persistent incidents continued to occur, causing administrative headaches across various Federation departments. Just last solar month, a human ambassador had attempted to upgrade the communication systems of the ancient Zerlap species by what he termed jailbreaking their millennia-old quantum resonance network. His intentions had been benevolent. He merely wanted to increase the transmission speed so that the notoriously slow-speaking Zerlaps could keep pace in interspecies conferences. The result, however, was a diplomatic incident that required 27 separate formal apologies and the creation of a new subcommittee dedicated solely to technology boundary respect and enforcement. Before that, a seemingly innocuous interspecies culinary competition had devolved into what Federation news networks had dubbed the Spice Wars. A human chef, disappointed by what she considered the bland flavors of most Federation cuisine, had introduced a selection of Earth's hottest peppers into the competition. Several delegates from species with particularly sensitive chemoreceptors had required emergency medical attention, and one Malosian diplomat temporarily lost the ability to perceive the color blue. These incidents and dozens more like them had led to the creation of Appendix H, Protocols for Human-Related Incidents, a document that had begun as a brief addendum to the Federation Charter and had since grown into a sprawling 17-volume set of regulations, guidelines, and warning signs that was longer and more complex than the original problem it aimed to address. Humans, Ambassador Glix of Rigel 7 had once remarked during a closed council session, are not malicious. They are simply chaotically innovative. It was during an unusually tedious council meeting regarding the standardization of ventilation duct sizes on Federation space stations that the dangerous idea first emerged. The discussion had dragged on for hours, with delegates from 47 worlds debating the merits of circular versus hexagonal duct cross-sections with a fervor that seemed wildly disproportionate to the topic at hand. Ambassador Tlon, a typically reserved Andorian who had mellowed somewhat in recent years, rose from her seat during a brief lull in the debate. Her antennae twitched thoughtfully as she addressed the council. "Esteemed colleagues," she began, her voice cutting through the somnolent atmosphere of the chamber, "I find myself reflecting on our ongoing challenges with our human member worlds. When they first joined the Federation, they provided us with what they called a starter kit, a compilation of cultural, historical, and sociological data meant to help us understand them better. Several council members visibly tensed at the mention of the infamous Humanity Starter Kit. The data package had been a well-intentioned offering from Earth upon joining the Federation, a comprehensive guide to human culture, history, psychology, and societal norms. It had also been the source of countless headaches, misunderstandings, and bizarre incidents as Federation scholars attempted to make sense of concepts like reality television, meme culture, and something particularly bewildering called interpretive dance. We have studied this starter kit extensively, Tlon continued, seemingly oblivious to the discomfort her words were causing. But I wonder if we have truly understood it all. Perhaps we should request an update, a more advanced package, if you will. An advanced kit that might shed light on the aspects of humanity we still struggle to comprehend. The chamber fell silent. Chancellor Zorp's gill slits flared in alarm. Ambassador Glix, who had headed the original committee tasked with analyzing the starter kit, visibly paled, his normally ruddy complexion taking on the hue of uncooked dough. Ambassador Tlon, Zorp said carefully, I appreciate your intellectual curiosity. However, I believe our resources might be better directed toward adapting to what we already know about humans rather than soliciting more potentially confounding information. With all due respect, Chancellor, interjected Ambassador Krell, a Ferengi whose interest in human culture had always seemed suspiciously aligned with his interest in human markets. I support Ambassador Tlon's suggestion. Humans have many unique products and services that could benefit the Federation economically. A deeper understanding of their culture could open new avenues for trade and scientific exchange, added Dr. Mira, a Betazoid xenoanthropologist whose academic career had flourished since humanity's admission to the Federation. There are still many aspects of human psychology and social structures that remain opaque to us. The debate that followed was heated, with the council chamber dividing roughly into two camps. Those who remembered the chaos of the original starter kit and wanted nothing to do with a sequel, and those whose curiosity or commercial interests outweighed their caution. Chancellor Zorp attempted to steer the conversation back to ventilation ducts several times, but the prospect of an updated human cultural package had captured the council's imagination far more effectively than discussions of proper airflow ever could. What harm could come from asking? Ambassador Krell argued, his pointed teeth gleaming in the chamber's soft light. Surely we have become more adept at processing human cultural information since they first joined us. The harm, Glix countered, his voice strained, could be immeasurable. Do you recall the 3-week period when half the Federation's youth became obsessed with something called planking after that information leaked from the original starter kit? Or the diplomatic crisis that ensued when we misinterpreted human stand-up comedy as a form of ritualized public humiliation. Despite Glick's impassioned plea, the momentum had shifted. Many council members, particularly those who had not directly dealt with the aftermath of the original starter kit, were intrigued by the possibility of gaining new insights into their enigmatic human colleagues. When the vote came, it was painfully close. Chancellor Zorp watched with a sense of looming dread as the tally was counted. 107 in favor, 102 against, with 43 abstentions. The motion had passed. The Federation would formally request an updated cultural information package from Earth. Very well, Zorp sighed, his gills drooping in resignation. The Federation will compose a formal request to Earth for what shall we call it? Perhaps, Dr. Mira suggested helpfully, a supplementary and updated cultural information package, SUSIP for short. Yes, that sounds appropriately bureaucratic, Zorp nodded. And for the love of all that orbits, we will avoid any mention of a starter kit. The request, when finally drafted, approved, revised, approved again, and sent, was a masterpiece of diplomatic language. It expressed the Federation's deep appreciation for Earth's previous cultural contributions, its profound respect for human customs and traditions, and its earnest desire to further enhance mutual understanding between humans and the myriad other species of the Federation. It requested, in the most cordial terms possible, a supplementary and updated cultural information package to build upon the foundation laid by previous cultural exchanges. What it did not express was the deep undercurrent of anxiety that ran through the upper echelons of the Federation as they waited for Earth's response. The weeks that followed the sending of the request were marked by a palpable tension throughout the Federation's administrative centers. Security systems were upgraded, cultural crisis response teams were placed on high alert, and rumors began to circulate among the lower ranks of Federation staff. I heard they're sending a compilation of something called Extreme Sports, whispered one Vulcanade to another in the commissary of the Federation's Central Complex. Apparently, Humans deliberately throw themselves off cliffs for recreation. That can't be right, his colleague replied, though uncertainty tinged her voice. Even humans wouldn't be that illogical. Similar conversations occurred throughout the Federation's member worlds as news of the request spread. On some planets, particularly those with more adventurous populations, there was genuine excitement about the prospect of new human cultural data. On others, especially those that had experienced firsthand the bewildering aftermath of the original starter kit, citizens viewed the coming package with trepidation bordering on dread. Chancellor Zorp found himself unable to sleep properly, his dreams haunted by visions of incomprehensible human rituals and customs running rampant through the Federation's carefully ordered societies. It was during the fourth week after sending the request that the reply came, not in the form of a standard data transmission as expected, but as a massive cargo vessel that appeared at the edge of the Sol system, requesting permission to deliver a package to Federation headquarters. The ship, when it finally docked at the Federation's primary orbital facility, was unlike any standard human vessel. It appeared to be cobbled together from parts of different ships, painted in a riot of colors and adorned with graffiti-like artwork that seemed to defy any coherent aesthetic principle. The name emblazoned on its hull, the Me Machine, offered no clarification as to its purpose or origin. From the ship's cavernous hold emerged a container even larger and more ominously peculiar than the one that had delivered the original starter kit. This massive crate was labeled with holographic text that shifted between various Earth languages and finally settled on Federation standard. SUSIP, Humanity 2.0, now with more features. Beside the text was a small animated image of a human face, closing one eye in what cultural experts identified as a wink, a gesture that, depending on context, could indicate conspiracy, humor, flirtation, or the presence of a foreign object in the ocular cavity. The container was transferred with excessive caution to a secure facility specifically constructed for its reception. A new committee had been formed to handle the unpacking and initial analysis, chaired by Dr. Soren, a young Vulcan xenosociologist whose logical mind and lack of practical experience with human irrationality made him simultaneously the most qualified and the least prepared for the task. When Ambassador Glix was approached about joining the committee, he submitted a formal declination citing prolonged psychological trauma from previous exposure to concentrated human cultural artifacts, and promptly took an extended leave of absence to a remote meditation retreat on Risa. The unpacking ceremony for this second container was far less grandiose than the first had been. There were no speeches, no delegation of dignitaries, just a team of specialists in biohazard suits, despite repeated assurances from human representatives that the contents were not biological in nature. Several security officers armed with weapons of questionable effectiveness against cultural concepts, and a small army of xenopsychologists standing by to address any immediate mental health crises that might arise from exposure to the container's contents. When the seal was finally broken and the container opened, the team was greeted not just by the expected data storage devices, but by an assortment of physical objects that defied immediate categorization. A collection of small handheld devices labeled as neural toys or fidget gadgets, including spinners, cubes covered in buttons, and malleable substances that made oddly satisfying sounds when pressed or stretched. The documentation claimed these items were essential for human cognitive function during meetings or any activity requiring prolonged attention, a statement that caused considerable alarm among the Federation officials who had engaged in countless meetings with human delegates fidgeting with these very objects. Samples of functional foods with outlandish claims on their packaging boosts pointless argumentability by 300%. Enhances creative interpretation of statistical data, promotes resistance to logical persuasion. One particularly concerning product, labeled Quantum Thought Enhancer, was simply a capsule filled with what analysis revealed to be caffeine, sugar, and trace amounts of compounds that Federation scientists could not immediately identify. A recording device that emitted what was described as ASMR content, whispers, soft tapping sounds, and the rustling of packaging materials that apparently induced autonomous sensory meridian response in humans, but caused most other species to experience intense discomfort or, in the case of one Antarean researcher, to molt prematurely. A massive data block meticulously categorizing something called conspiracy theories, organized by plausibility, popularity, and potential for causing interspecies diplomatic incidents if taken seriously. One subsection was specifically marked, "Do not share with Vulcans," in bold red lettering. A functioning model of a 3D printer busily manufacturing a smaller version of itself, which upon completion would presumably begin printing an even smaller version, raising unsettling questions about potential runaway replication scenarios. The initial response of the analysis team ranged from bewilderment to outright alarm. Federation scientists attempted to apply rigorous analytical methodologies to the objects, but struggled to discern their underlying logic or purpose. Xenopsychologists formulated increasingly complex theories about human cognitive processes, with one notable paper published during this period titled "The Paradox of Purposeful Purposelessness in Human Cultural Artifacts," a comprehensive failure to comprehend. When the team turned their attention to the actual data components of the package, the situation became even more complicated. The SUSIP contained not just updates to the information provided in the original starter kit, but entire new categories of human culture, technology, philosophy, and social dynamics that had either emerged since the first package or had been deemed too advanced or potentially destabilizing to include in the initial offering. The committee's deep dive into the new data blocks revealed a cultural landscape even more bewildering than what had been presented in the original starter kit. The section on contemporary human philosophy included new schools of thought that left Federation philosophers questioning the nature of reality itself. Postmodernism, existentialism as interpreted through internet memes, and various nihilistic philosophical movements presented such radical departures from traditional Federation thought that several prominent Vulcan philosophers reportedly requested temporary leaves of absence to recalibrate their logical frameworks. One particularly troubling philosophical tract, titled "LOL, Nothing Matters: The Liberation of Cosmic Insignificance Therapy," caused a minor epidemic of what Federation medical personnel termed existential hiccups among those who studied it too intensely. Symptoms included sporadic laughter at inappropriate moments, decreased productivity, and a tendency to respond to serious questions with a phrase, "Sir, this is a Wendy's," a reference that remained impenetrable despite extensive cross-referencing with the cultural database. The economic data proved equally disruptive. Concepts like NFTs, non-fungible tokens, cryptocurrency, and stock markets that fluctuated based on social media tweets from influential figures left even the shrewd Ferengi economists baffled. They could not comprehend why humans would assign value to digital assets that, in their words, don't actually exist in any meaningful sense. A Ferengi financial delegation that had been eagerly anticipating insights into new profit opportunities left their briefing session in a state of profound confusion, with their leader muttering repeatedly, "But where is the tangible product? Where is the physical latinum?" The section on Social Media 2.0 painted a picture of human social interaction that seemed paradoxically both more connected and more isolated than what had been described in the original starter kit. New social media trends included increasingly dangerous challenges. One particularly alarming entry described something called the Tide Pod Challenge that Federation health officials immediately flagged as a potential public health crisis should it spread beyond Earth. Bizarre virtual reality filters that transformed human appearances in ways that would be physically impossible for most species. Cancel culture, a social phenomenon that several Federation sociologists compared unfavorably to historical purges on various worlds, and online wars fought with memes and hashtags rather than weapons, yet somehow resulting in real-world casualties to reputations and careers. The committee spent 3 full days attempting to decipher the concept of the ratio on a platform called Twitter, ultimately publishing a 347-page analysis that concluded, "It appears to be simultaneously a mathematical concept, a social punishment, and a form of entertainment, with the precise definition shifting based on contextual factors that we have yet to fully catalog. Federation entertainment analysts were particularly disturbed by the section on interactive entertainment. Virtual reality games with hyper-realistic scenarios ranging from mundane activities like farming to apocalyptic survival situations. Escape rooms with themes like pandemic laboratory and nuclear meltdown bunker. And the rise of influencers, who attracted millions of followers by performing seemingly pointless activities or pranks raised serious questions about human psychological needs and priorities. One researcher, after spending 48 consecutive hours analyzing a popular human game called Animal Crossing, submitted a report that consisted solely of the words, "It's about debt. It's all about debt," repeated for 17 pages before abruptly concluding with a crude drawing of what appeared to be a raccoon wearing a business suit. The data on citizen science revealed both impressive and alarming aspects of human scientific endeavors. Community-driven research projects sometimes produced results of startling accuracy, occasionally outperforming professional scientific institutions. Other times, they veered wildly off course, such as the documented case of a project aimed at proving Earth was flat by launching homemade rockets. A concept so contradictory, it caused a small explosion in a Vulkan quantum logic processor attempting to analyze it. Despite the committee's best efforts at containment, information leakage was inevitable. A junior analyst with access to the conspiracy theories data block accidentally transferred portions of it to the Federation's internal network during a routine backup. Within hours, the memetic content had spread throughout the system, introducing Federation citizens to concepts like the lizard people theory, flat Earth, and the Illuminati. The results were as swift as they were concerning. Within days, new theories unique to the Federation began to emerge. Is Chancellor Zorp actually a reptilian in disguise? Is the Federation hiding the existence of cheese-based dimensions? Are Vulcans suppressing the truth about emotion-enhancing crystals from Sector 47? A particularly popular conspiracy theory suggested that humans themselves were an elaborate hoax perpetrated by the Federation Council to distract from real issues, citing as evidence the seemingly impossible contradiction of a species that could simultaneously develop warp technology and continue to find entertainment in videos of felines knocking objects off elevated surfaces. Chancellor Zorp ordered an emergency containment protocol, but it was too late. The damage had been done, and Federation social networks were awash with speculation, memes, and increasingly bizarre theories that combined the worst aspects of human conspiracy culture with the unique perspectives of dozens of alien species. The real crisis, however, was yet to come. Despite the Federation leadership's horror, elements of the new cultural package began spreading even more rapidly and thoroughly than those from the original starter kit had. This was particularly true among younger Federation citizens and lower-level diplomats who had more regular contact with humans. The once-staid corridors of the Federation's headquarters began to witness phenomena that would have been unthinkable just months earlier. Alien versions of TikTok challenges emerged, with young Federation officials recording themselves attempting feats like balancing on 17 tentacles simultaneously or communicating exclusively through skin color changes for 24 standard hours. One particularly popular challenge involved attempting to pronounce human tongue twisters while underwater, resulting in several near drownings and at least one evolutionary breakthrough for an amphibious species whose vocal apparatus spontaneously reconfigured itself. NFTs of famous diplomatic moments were minted and traded covertly, as official Federation policy strictly prohibited assigning arbitrary value to digital representations of historical events. The most sought-after token, depicting the historic handshake between the first human Federation president and the ambassador of a silicon-based life form, reportedly changed hand for the equivalent of a small moon's annual economic output. Earth-themed cafes began appearing in diplomatic districts across the Federation, serving beverages and foods that were often wildly inaccurate approximations of human cuisine. One establishment on Andoria served a concoction it called cappuccino though is actually a gelatinous cube infused with methane and topped with luminescent fungi. Inexplicably, humans themselves frequented these establishments, apparently amused by the misinterpretations of their culture. New human slang and memes infiltrated informal conversations, leading to situations where venerable ambassadors would respond to formal proposals with phrases like "weird flex, but okay," or "that's SUS," leaving their counterparts bewildered and translators on the verge of nervous breakdowns. Perhaps most alarming was the discovery that several high-ranking officials had begun secretly using fidget toys during tense diplomatic negotiations. Chancellor Zorp himself was caught on internal security footage absent-mindedly manipulating a device called a poppet during a critical discussion about resource allocation in the neutral zone. The Federation's leadership attempted to stem the tide of what they now termed cultural contamination through a series of increasingly desperate measures. New regulations were issued on an almost daily basis. Directive 347B, Prohibition of Memetic Content in Official Communications. Executive Order 29C, Mandatory Screening of all personal electronic devices for unauthorized Earth-related applications. Emergency. Protocol 111D, Immediate confiscation of all objects that spin, pop, squish, or make inexplicably satisfying sounds when manipulated. Each new regulation, however, seemed only to increase the allure of human cultural elements. The Federation's youth, in particular, embraced the forbidden aspects of Earth culture with an enthusiasm that bordered on reverence. Underground meme exchanges emerged, where contraband human content was traded like precious commodities. The phrase, "I have new Earth memes," became the equivalent of "I possess highly valuable information" in youth culture across dozens of worlds. The diplomatic repercussions were severe. Negotiations with non-Federation empires became increasingly difficult as Federation diplomats unconsciously incorporated human slang or negotiation tactics, either too direct or too unpredictable, into their approaches, causing disastrous misunderstandings. One particularly notorious incident involved a Federation ambassador attempting to rickroll a warrior king from a highly martial culture, resulting in a brief but intense space skirmish that required 3 separate peacekeeping missions to resolve. The problem, Dr. Soren explained in an emergency briefing to the Federation Council, is not that human culture is inherently harmful. It is that it operates on principles that are fundamentally incompatible with many of our members' psychological and social frameworks. Humans embrace contradiction, irony, and absurdity not as problems to be solved, but as essential components of their worldview. This perspective is proving highly contagious. Chancellor Zorp, looking noticeably more worn than he had just months earlier, called for one final council meeting dedicated to the SUSIP issue. The chamber was subdued, lacking the heated debates that had characterized earlier discussions. In their place was a weary silence, punctuated only by the occasional sound of a fidget toy being surreptitiously manipulated under the table. The committee's final report was presented by Dr. Soren, whose once immaculate Vulcan composure showed subtle signs of strain. Dark circles under his eyes and a slight but noticeable tick in his left eyebrow hinted at the toll that prolonged exposure to concentrated human culture had taken. After extensive analysis, Soren stated, his voice carefully controlled, the committee has reached the conclusion that attempting to fully comprehend humanity is a futile endeavor with significant potential for widespread psychological destabilization. Our recommendation is simple. We should cease trying. The report itself was surprisingly brief given the months of work that had gone into it. Its central conclusion was stark in its simplicity. Human culture defies complete logical analysis because it is not, itself, governed by consistent logical principles. It is instead a constantly evolving, self-referential, and frequently self-contradictory network of ideas, practices, and beliefs that often exist primarily to challenge other ideas, practices, and beliefs, including its own. An appendix to the report, labeled Attempted Taxonomy of Human Internet Humor, had been abandoned after only 3 pages, the last entry simply stating, classification impossible. Memes about memes about memes. Recursion continues infinitely. Researcher requesting transfer to different project. After limited discussion, the council voted, with unusual unanimity, to permanently seal the data from the SUSIP in a maximum security archive, guarded by robots specifically programmed to lack curiosity. All future requests for deeper investigation into human culture would be automatically denied, with a standardized response stating that such information was under review, a bureaucratic euphemism that everyone understood to mean locked away forever. In his retirement address several months later, his departure from office having been accelerated by the SUSIP incident, Chancellor Zorp made a rare admission of governmental error. The request for a second information package, he told the assembled dignitaries, his once vibrant blue skin now faded to a pale gray, was a mistake born of arrogance. The arrogance of believing that the Federation could understand and control everything within its borders. We have learned, at considerable cost, that some things cannot be fully comprehended or regulated. They can only be experienced and, over time, adapted to. He paused, his gills fluttering in what those familiar with Gravelaxian expressions recognized as wry amusement. We do not need to understand them, he concluded. We only need to learn to live with the storm. The Federation continued to exist, of course, but it was forever changed. The presence of humans and their culture became an unavoidable constant, an irritant that sometimes caused significant friction in the great bureaucratic machine, but also, unexpectedly, a source of energy and innovation that had been lacking in the organization's more stagnant periods. The procedures remained bureaucratic, but there was now always an unpredictable human factor working its way through the system, challenging assumptions, breaking rules, and occasionally, quite by accident, solving problems that had resisted more methodical approaches for centuries. In the years that followed, it became something of an open secret that many high-ranking Federation officials maintained private collections of human cultural artifacts, despite the official policy of containment. Some found that the chaotic human perspective offered valuable insights that traditional Federation thought could not provide. Others simply enjoyed the brief respite from rigid order that human culture afforded them. It was perhaps fitting that the final image captured by security cameras during Chancellor Zorp's last day in office showed the venerable statesman alone in his private chambers, methodically working his way through a device humans called a Rubik's Cube. His expression, as he manipulated the colorful puzzle, contained something rarely seen in a Gravelaxian of his standing. Simple, uncomplicated joy. In a nearby office, Dr. Soren, who had since been promoted to head of interspecies cultural relations, a position created specifically to deal with the ongoing human situation, was secretly attempting to decipher the latest memes spreading through the Federation's internal networks. His expression was one of perfect Vulcan logic, yet absolute bafflement. The image showed what appeared to be a human in formal attire, gesturing toward a butterfly, accompanied by text reading, "Is this diplomacy?" Dr. Soren had allocated 17% of his considerable intellectual resources to understanding this image for the past week, with no success. The Federation had learned its lesson, but the regret over asking about the starter kit, and especially its upgrade, would echo through its halls of power for millennia to come. And somewhere out there, humanity was undoubtedly already preparing for Humanity 3.0. When that day came, the Federation would be ready, not with analysis committees and containment protocols, but with the simple acceptance that some things in the universe defy understanding, and that perhaps that's what makes them worth having around.